Now let's clarify two terms before proceeding: parameter versus argument. A parameter is a variable in a method definition, such as here. Days is a parameter of this grow method. An argument is the actual data you pass into a method's parameter when that method is called. Here are two calls of this instance method on a mini object. This argument days is a local variable defined in the method. This days is different from the days parameter defined in the grow method, such as John's in your family is different from John from my family. They just happen to have the same name. When you call a method, Java Virtual Machine passes a copy of the argument's value to the corresponding parameter. Now we can explain the difference between passing an array versus passing a primitive type element of an array into a method. Both will pass a copy of the argument into the parameter. For an array argument, it is a reference variable, so it stores the address of the array object. When you pass an array, the address is copied over, so the argument and the parameter now point to the same object, as this example shows. Suppose we have an array named x in main, passed to a method called increase. Since they both point to the same object, any modification on the parameter in the method is on this array object. If you change the value of one element, that's reflected on this array object, and the change persists after the method ends. Read chapter 7.5 for more detail. Passing a primitive type value into a method is different, since a primitive type variable stores the value, not an address. The value is copied over from argument to parameter. Now you have two independent copies. For example, if we now have an array y in main, and its element y0 is passed into a method with an int parameter, the value of y0, 1, will be copied into the parameter. If you modify this parameter y in the method, it doesn't affect the argument y0. To summarize, a primitive type argument is not affected by changes to a corresponding parameter in a method call. A reference type argument, such as an array, changes if a corresponding parameter is modified in a method, as they point to one same object. While we talk about parameter versus argument, let's summarize how to decide which variable an identifier is referencing. When you see this dot identifier, it must be an instance or static data member. For example, here this .num is referencing a data member of the class. This num is not the parameter num. Without the keyword this, we look for a variable or parameter in the closest scope surrounding that name. The smallest scope would be a block defined by a pair of braces or in a loop. If you have several scopes nested together, you start from the innermost scope and go up one scope at a time. Here num in the for loop is the one declared right here. After you look at all nested blocks, you get to the master scope. Back to this constructor. The num in the branch is within this pair of braces, hence in the scope of this constructor. We look at this message, the only one with that name is the parameter. So this num is the parameter num. Within a method, you can't have a parameter and a local variable with the same name. Beyond the method, next you need to look into the class scope. Here the num after the for loop is in the scope of this method. But there is no local variable or parameter with that name, so we need to look into the class to see if you have an instance or static variable of that name. If not, then it must be a syntax error.